The city slept under a blanket of stars, but in the penthouse at the very top, the most powerful man in the city was wide awake, pretending to be broken. His name was Kai, and to everyone who walked through the heavily guarded doors of his luxurious apartment, he was a prisoner in his own body. A tragic attack, they whispered, had left the young leader of the Nightfall group paralyzed, his legs useless, his future confined to a sleek, black wheelchair. Tonight, as usual, his most trusted friend and head of security, Leo, stood like a stone statue by the floor-to-ceiling window. Leo's arms were crossed over his broad chest, his eyes constantly scanning the city lights for any threat. He had been Kai's shadow since they were boys scrapping in the orphanage, his loyalty as solid as the muscles that strained against his suit jacket. "The doctor left your evening pills," Leo said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't move from his post. From his wheelchair, Kai gave a slow, careful nod. The picture of weary weakness. "Thank you, Leo." His voice was soft, almost fragile. It was a lie. Every bit of this was a lie. Kai's legs were perfectly fine. The attack had been real, but the paralysis was a clever trick, a test he had created for the wolves he suspected were hiding among his own staff. He felt the weight of the performance in his bones. It had been 3 long months of this charade. 3 months of watching people's eyes when they thought he wasn't looking. Some, like Leo, showed steady, unwavering concern. Others, like his second-in-command, Mason, had a flicker in their gaze that Kai didn't like. A flicker that looked a lot like satisfaction. Mason's report on the Southside deliveries was perfect, Kai murmured, keeping his hands still in his lap. Almost too perfect. Leo finally turned, his dark eyes meeting Kai's. "You think he's cooking the books?" Even when questioning, Leo's tone was protective, ready to act on Kai's slightest hint. "I think," Kai said, letting a sigh rattle his thin frame for effect, "that when a cat thinks the watchdog is chained, it gets brave enough to steal the meat." The loneliness of his deception was a cold knot in his stomach. He trusted Leo with his life, but not even Leo knew the truth. The burden of suspicion was his to carry alone. A soft knock at the penthouse door broke the quiet. Leo was instantly alert, a hand moving to the weapon hidden under his jacket. "It's just the new guy. Hired for the night shift. Mason approved him this afternoon." "Let him in," Kai said, settling deeper into his wheelchair, arranging his face into the mask of calm resignation he wore like armor. The door opened and a young man walked in. He wasn't what Kai expected. He'd imagined another hulking figure like Leo, all sharp suits and sharper eyes. This man, Eli, was slimmer, his posture relaxed but watchful. He had warm, observant eyes that swept the room not with aggression, but with a quiet understanding. He met Kai's gaze directly, and for a split second, Kai felt a strange, unsettling sensation, like being seen, truly seen for the first time in months. "Sir," Eli said, his voice calm and clear. He gave a respectful nod to Leo, then his attention returned to Kai. "My name is Eli. I'll be on duty from now until morning." Kai offered a faint, tired smile. "Welcome, Eli. I'm sure Leo will fill you in. There's not much to do. I mostly just sit here." He gestured a limp hand toward his legs, the picture of helplessness. But Eli didn't look at his legs with pity. He didn't look at the expensive wheelchair. He looked at Kai. "I'll make sure it stays quiet," he said simply. Then, his eyes drifted to the bookshelf beside Kai. His gaze lingered on a specific, slightly worn volume of classic adventure stories. An hour later, Kai pretended to doze in his chair. Leo had gone to do a security check of the lower floors, leaving Eli as the sole guard. The silence was heavy. Kai listened to Eli's quiet breathing, the soft shift of his feet on the plush carpet. He expected boredom or the tense alertness of a new employee trying to impress. He did not expect the soft sound of a page turning. He cracked an eye open the tiniest bit. Eli was standing by the bookshelf, not touching anything, but his index finger was gently tracing the spine of that same adventure book. A small, almost sad smile touched Eli's lips before he returned to his post by the door, his watchful eyes once again on the room, on his boss. A strange feeling uncurled in Kai's chest, warm and confusing. It wasn't suspicion. It was something else, something he hadn't felt since he started this painful game. It was a spark of curiosity. This new guard, this Omega who moved with a silent grace, hadn't looked at the powerful, paralyzed mafia boss. He'd looked at the man sitting alone, and he'd noticed the book he might like to read. For the first time in 3 months, the walls of Kai's lonely performance felt less like a fortress and more like a cage he desperately wanted to step out of. The trap for the traitor was set, but now an unexpected variable named Eli had quietly walked into the middle of it. And Kai had no idea if he was a threat or the first person in a long time who might actually be real. The city's night shift turned into the pale gray light of morning, but in Kai's penthouse, the performance continued without a break. Kai watched the sunrise paint stripes of gold across the floor, his body held in the familiar, frustrating stillness of his chair. Eli had not moved from his respectful position by the door all night. He hadn't fidgeted, hadn't sighed with boredom, hadn't even pulled out a phone. He was a statue of quiet attention. Leo returned just as the first coffee cart rattled on the street far below. He gave Eli a curt, appraising nod, which Eli returned. It was a silent exchange between professionals. "I'll take the day watch," Leo said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Report." "All quiet, sir," Eli responded. His voice was like the morning light, clear and calm. The perimeter sensors were triggered twice by pigeons. I checked the feeds both times. No other activity. Kai listened, keeping his head tilted down as if the conversation was just background noise to his tragic existence. Pigeons. Most new guards would have dismissed it or worse, not even noticed the tiny blips on the security monitor. Eli had checked. Twice. "Adequate," Leo grunted, though Kai could hear the faint note of approval. Leo valued vigilance above all else. "Dismissed. Be back tonight at 10. "Yes, sir." Eli turned to leave, but then he paused. He looked directly at Kai. "Sir, would you like the window shades adjusted before I go? The sun will be directly on your chair in about 20 minutes. A simple question. A practical one. Yet it hit Kai like a shock. In 3 months of this act, no one, not the doctors, not the cleaners, not even Leo, had ever thought to ask him that. They moved him, they brought him things, they talked about him, but they rarely asked him. They saw the wheelchair, the blanket over his legs, the tragic young boss. They didn't see the person who might not want the sun in his eyes. Kai made himself blink slowly as if processing the words through a fog of pain. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Eli." Eli didn't give a dramatic bow or an overly sympathetic smile. He just walked, with that same quiet, efficient grace, to the window and adjusted the smart blinds by a few degrees, casting the chair into a gentle, shaded coolness. He did it perfectly, as if he'd studied the path of the sun in this very room. As he walked back toward the door, his eyes passed over the bookshelf again. That same, slightly worn volume of adventure stories, The Sky Pirates of Crystallia, seemed to catch his gaze for a fleeting second. The door clicked shut behind him and the penthouse felt different. Emptier, somehow, but also charged with the ghost of that simple, observant kindness. Leo let out a long breath and walked over to the kitchen, starting the coffee machine. He's sharp. Observant. Mason actually did a decent job picking him for once. Mason picked him? Kai asked, his actor's mask slipping for a microsecond into genuine sharp interest. Screened and recommended him, yeah. Said the guy came with impeccable references from a security firm overseas. Needed a fresh start. A cold trickle, separate from the morning chill, went down Kai's spine. Mason had picked him. Was Eli another piece of Mason's betrayal? Was the kindness just a better act than his own? The doubt was a poison, and it spread quickly, spoiling the strange warmth Eli's small gesture had left. The day dragged on. Kai held meetings from his wheelchair, speaking in low tones about shipments and territories while his managers tried not to stare at his legs. Mason was there, smiling his too bright smile, handing Kai folders, his touch just a little too patronizing. Don't you worry about a thing, Kai. We're handling it all. You just focus on getting better. Every word felt like a lie coated in sugar. Kai wanted to scream. He wanted to stand up and slam Mason's smug face into the polished table. But he didn't. He just nodded, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white under the cover of his blanket. When the last manager left, the silence was thick with Kai's simmering anger. Leo stood by the window, a constant, solid presence. He's getting cocky, Leo muttered, not needing to say who. He thinks the lion's teeth have been pulled, Kai replied, his voice cold and flat, all pretense of weakness gone for Leo's ears only. We'll see. Night fell again. At exactly 10 o'clock, the penthouse door opened and Eli stepped back in. He had changed into a fresh, dark sweater. He smelled faintly of soap in the cool night air. He gave his quiet nod to Leo and then to Kai. Sir. The night routine began again. Leo gave his brief update and left. Kai pretended to read a business report on a tablet, his mind racing. He decided to test this new variable, this mystery named Eli. He let the tablet slip from his fingers. It wasn't a dramatic drop. It just clattered softly onto the rug beside his wheelchair. He made a small, frustrated sound and reached down, his movement awkward and strained, his fingers just brushing the corner of the device. Before he could even attempt another grab, Eli was there. He didn't rush. He knelt, picked up the tablet, and instead of just handing it back, he carefully wiped the screen on his sleeve. Then he did something extraordinary. He placed it not in Kai's outstretched, waiting hand, but on the small table attached to the wheelchair within perfect reach. "There you are, sir," Eli said. His eyes met Kai's, and in their warm depths, Kai saw no pity, no impatience. He saw understanding. An understanding that said, "I know you want to do it yourself. So here's a way that lets you." Kai's breath caught in his throat. The test had backfired. Instead of revealing a clumsy traitor or a sycophant, it had revealed a profound and simple kindness. It was a kindness that saw past the performance to the pride of the person inside. "Thank you," Kai managed, his usual soft tone genuinely shaky for once. Eli just returned to his post. As the deep night wore on, Kai found his eyes drifting shut, not from pretense, but from a strange, unwinding tension. He was just on the edge of real sleep when he heard the softest sound. It was Eli's voice humming a few low, unfamiliar notes of a tune. It was a lonely, beautiful sound that wrapped around the quiet room. In that moment, the dangerous plan, the betrayals, the heavy crown of his lies, all of it faded for a single peaceful heartbeat. The new guard with the kind eyes wasn't just an unexpected variable. He was becoming a sanctuary Kai hadn't known he needed, and that made him more dangerous to Kai's guarded heart than any traitor ever could. A week passed in the strange new rhythm of Eli's nights. The giant penthouse, once just a beautiful cage for Kai's performance, began to feel different. It wasn't the furniture or the view, it was the air itself. When Leo was on duty, the atmosphere was one of loyal protection, a fortress on high alert. But when Eli took his post, the quiet changed. It became a softer, watchful kind of quiet, like the stillness in a forest where someone is observing the birds, not hunting them. Kai found himself caught in a confusing tug-of-war. One part of him, the alpha boss who had built an empire on suspicion, screamed that Eli's kindness was a trick. Mason had hired him after all. Every gentle action could be a carefully laid trapdoor, waiting for Kai to foolishly step on it. But another part, a smaller, lonelier part that had been buried under the weight of leadership and now this exhausting lie, listened to Eli's quiet humming at 3 a.m. and felt a crack form in the ice around his heart. Tonight the test was a book. Kai had been staring at the same page of a dry financial report for an hour, his eyes glazing over. On a whim, he let his gaze drift longingly to the adventure book on the shelf, The Sky Pirates of Crystallia. It was an old favorite, a story of freedom and flight he hadn't dared touch since his accident. A paralyzed man, after all, wouldn't dream of sky pirates. He let out a sigh, this one not entirely acted. He shifted in his chair, the rustle of his blanket loud in the silence. From his place by the door, Eli's calm voice broke the quiet. "That one has a good reputation." Kai's head snapped up, his mask of weary sadness almost slipping into genuine surprise. "I'm sorry?" Eli nodded slightly toward the bookshelf. "The Sky Pirates. I read it a long time ago. The captain doesn't follow anyone's map but his own. It's a good story." Kai's mind raced. Was this flattery? An attempt to find common ground as part of a plot? He chose his words with the care of a man walking on thin glass. It seems like it would be about freedom." "Yes," Eli agreed simply. He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to force a conversation. He just offered the observation and returned to his watchful silence, leaving the words hanging in the air between them. That was the true surprise. Eli never pushed. He offered little pieces of himself, a noticed book, a hummed tune, a perfectly adjusted shade, and then stepped back, giving Kai all the power to accept or ignore them. In a world where everyone wanted something from the Nightfall boss, Eli's lack of demand was the most confusing thing of all. The next evening, the first real storm of the season rolled over the city. Thunder growled in the distance, and rain began to lash the penthouse windows in great, sweeping sheets. Leo, finishing his shift, frowned at the weather. "Communications might get spotty. I'll be in the security office downstairs running checks. You have the panic button." He tapped the small device hidden under the blanket on Kai's chair. Kai nodded. "We'll be fine." When Leo left, the storm took center stage. A spectacular flash of lightning lit the entire skyline in blinding white, followed instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it vibrated the floor. The power flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The penthouse was plunged into an inky, roaring blackness. The steady hum of electronics vanished, leaving only the howl of the wind and the drumming rain. Kai's heart gave a single hard pound against his ribs. This was an unplanned test. In the total dark, with no cameras possibly working, he was just a man in a chair. A perfect opportunity for a traitor to strike. He heard Eli move. Not a frantic scramble, but a smooth, deliberate shuffle of feet. A small, bright beam of light cut through the darkness. Eli had a pocket flashlight. The beam didn't swing wildly. It went first to the window, checking the integrity, then swept a low arc across the floor, before finally coming to rest on the wall beside Kai's chair, illuminating him without shining directly in his eyes. "Are you all right, sir?" Eli's voice was calm, as if they were discussing the weather on a sunny day. "I'm fine," Kai said, his own voice tighter than he intended. He could see Eli now in the back glow of the flashlight. He wasn't looming over him. He was kneeling a few feet away, a respectful distance, his body positioned between Kai and the door. A protector's stance. "The backup generator should kick in for the essential systems in about 90 seconds, Eli said, his tone factual. "The lightning must have tripped the main breaker." "You know the system well," Kai commented, trying to sound merely curious, not interrogating. "It's my job to know, sir," Eli replied. Then, in the intimate cocoon of dark and storm noise, he added, "Storms can make things feel exposed. But they always pass." Another flash of lightning, this one showing Kai Eli's profile. He was looking toward the window, his expression unreadable, but his posture was utterly unafraid. He was a calm island in the chaotic night. The backup power came on with a deep thump, and soft, emergency lights glowed around the room's edges. The immediate danger was gone, but the moment lingered. As the light returned, Eli stood smoothly. "I'll do a full perimeter check now that the power is cycling," he said, all business again. But before he turned away, he did something that stole the air from Kai's lungs. He reached over to the small table by Kai's chair, and from his own pocket, he placed a small foil-wrapped chocolate square beside Kai's water glass. It was the kind given out at nice restaurants. "For the adrenaline," Eli said softly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to give a mafia boss a piece of chocolate after a storm. "It helps." Then he was gone, moving silently into the hallway to begin his check. Kai stared at the little chocolate square. It was absurd. It was. It was the single most genuine human gesture anyone had shown him in years. It asked for nothing. It expected nothing. It was just kindness. The walls of his performance didn't just feel like a cage anymore. They felt like a suffocating shell, and Eli, with his quiet eyes and his pocket flashlight and his stupid piece of chocolate, was showing him a world outside of it. A world where a man could be seen and offered comfort and maybe even liked for who he was behind the throne and the tragedy. The treacherous, hopeful thought bloomed before he could crush it. What if he's real? And the even more dangerous thought followed. If he is real, what do I do when my lie finally destroys this? The little chocolate square sat on the table for 2 days. Kai didn't eat it. He just looked at it, the shiny foil catching the light, a tiny monument to a moment of unexpected kindness in the dark. It confused him more than any of Mason's slick reports or suspicious smiles. How was he supposed to plot revenge and trap traitors when someone was leaving him candy? The weight of his own lie was becoming unbearable. He was tired of the stiff, aching hours in the chair. He was tired of the careful, fragile voice. Most of all, he was tired of seeing the flicker of disappointment in Leo's eyes every day, a disappointment Leo thought was for Kai's condition, but Kai knew was for the distance growing between them. Leo was his brother and Kai was keeping him in the dark. Something had to break. He called Leo and Mason to his side in the living room, the city sprawling beneath them like a glittering game board. He took a deep, internal breath and slipped into his role, making his voice softer, weaker than usual. "I've had word," he began, looking not at them, but at his own lifeless hands in his lap. "From our friends in the shipping union. They want to make a new deal. A big one." Mason leaned forward, his interest sharp and immediate. "I'll handle it, Kai. You don't need to worry about a thing." "No," Kai said, shaking his head slowly. "It's too sensitive. They're old-fashioned. They want to meet the boss. They want to see my face." Leo stiffened. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. You're in no condition." "They'll come here," Kai interrupted gently. "To show good faith. A private meeting. Just them and me." He finally looked up, meeting Leo's concerned gaze and Mason's carefully neutral one. "This Friday night. I'll meet them alone in the study. No guards in the room." They insisted. Mason's eyebrows shot up. "Alone? Kai, that's madness." "It's the only way they'll sign," Kai said, injecting a note of tired desperation into his voice. "They're paranoid about leaks. They think if I'm willing to meet alone, unprotected, it proves I trust them and that they can trust me." He let the words hang, watching Mason's face for the greed he knew was there. He saw it. A tiny, almost invisible spark in Mason's eyes. The spark of a man seeing a perfect opportunity. A helpless boss, alone in a room, on a night when a terrible, tragic accident could so easily happen. "If that's what you think is best," Mason said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We'll have security thick as a wall outside the door, of course." "Of course," Kai echoed softly. Leo was silent, a storm brewing behind his eyes. He didn't agree, but he would never openly contradict Kai in front of others. Once Mason had left, practically buzzing with suppressed excitement, Leo turned on Kai. "This is a mistake. A huge one. You're making yourself a target." "I know," Kai said, and for the first time he let a sliver of his real self, his calculating self, show through the fragile mask. He held Leo's gaze, trying to communicate without words. "Trust me." Leo faltered, reading something in Kai's eyes he hadn't seen in months. The fire. The fight. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a bare whisper. "Kai, what are you doing?" "Setting a trap for a rat," Kai whispered back, the words a dangerous confession. "And you need to be ready to spring it." Understanding dawned on Leo's face, hard and cold. He didn't need it spelled out. He gave a single sharp nod. The loyal soldier was back, side by side with his general. "I'll be ready." The plan was set. The Friday night meeting was a complete fiction. There were no shipping union bosses. Kai would sit alone in his study, a silent, paralyzed duck in a pond, waiting to see which predator took the bait. Leo would be hidden in a secret adjacent room with a live video feed, ready to burst in. It was simple. It was brutal. It would finally end the gnawing suspicion. But as Friday approached, a new worry coiled in Kai's stomach. It wasn't about Mason or the trap. It was about Eli. Eli would be on duty that night. The new guard, the kind-eyed variable. Would Mason use him? Was he part of the plan? The thought of Eli being part of the betrayal sent a physical ache through Kai's chest, an ache that surprised him with its intensity. He told himself it was just about messing up his careful plans. He knew it was a lie. On Thursday night, Eli's last shift before the trap, the air in the penthouse was charged with Kai's silent anxiety. He couldn't focus. He fidgeted in his chair, an uncharacteristic movement. Eli noticed. Of course he did. Halfway through the night, Eli spoke from his post, his voice a calm ripple in the tense quiet. "You seem unsettled, sir." Kai forced a weak smile. "Just tired of the view." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My mother used to say that when a storm is coming, even the birds stop singing. They're not afraid. They're just waiting for the air to clear so they can start again." The words were so unexpected, so perfectly aimed at the turmoil inside him, that Kai was left speechless. He stared at Eli, who was looking out at the city, his profile peaceful. "What do the birds do if the storm never clears?" Kai heard himself ask, his real voice bleeding through the performative softness. Eli turned his head and looked directly at him. His gaze was deep and knowing. "Then they learn to sing a different song," he said simply. In that moment Kai felt utterly seen. Not as the boss, not as the paralyzed victim, but as a man drowning in a storm of his own making. Eli's words weren't a trap. They were a lifeline. A quiet suggestion that there could be a life, a song, after all this. It was the final, unbearable push. The trap for Mason was ready. But Kai now felt trapped himself. Trapped between the revenge he needed and the fragile, beautiful thing he might be about to destroy with it. He was setting a stage for betrayal, and the person he was most afraid of losing wasn't his power or his empire. It was the quiet man by the door who brought him chocolate and believed even broken birds could learn to sing again. Friday night arrived, cloaked in a tension so thick Kai felt he could choke on it. Every tick of the grand clock in the penthouse hallway was a hammer strike on his nerves. He had dressed carefully, not in his usual soft lounging clothes, but in a dark, crisp shirt, armor for the battle to come. The blanket over his legs felt heavier than ever. Leo had given him one last, hard look before taking his position in the hidden room next to the study. No words were needed. The plan was in motion. The false meeting was set for 9 p.m. At 8:30 Eli arrived for his shift. Kai watched him enter, his heart doing a complicated, painful squeeze. Eli looked the same as always, calm, professional, his warm eyes taking in the room. Did he know? Was his gentle soul just a brilliant act? "Sir," Eli nodded, his gaze lingering on Kai for a second longer than usual. Big meeting tonight. Yes, Kai said, forcing the weak smile. An important one. I'll ensure the hallway is completely secure, Eli said, turning to begin his usual checks. He was doing his job. Perfectly. At 5 minutes to 9, Mason bustled in, his smile wide and slick. Showtime, boss. Don't you worry. Everything is ready. The gentlemen from the union are on their way up. I'll escort them to the study door myself. His eyes darted around, avoiding looking directly at Kai's legs. You're sure you don't want me in there with you? They were very clear, Mason, Kai said, letting a thread of nervousness into his voice. Alone. It's a sign of respect. Of course, of course. Mason clapped his hands together, the picture of eager support. Well then. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Anything at all. The promise in his words was a dark, oily thing. Kai just nodded, wheeling himself toward the heavy wooden door of his private study. As he passed Eli, who was standing guard at the entrance to the hallway, their eyes met. Eli's expression was unreadable, but he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It looked like encouragement. Felt like a goodbye. Kai pushed open the study door and wheeled himself inside. The room was dark, lit only by a single brass desk lamp, just as he'd instructed. It pooled light on the empty chair opposite his desk, leaving the rest of the room in deep shadow. The perfect stage for a betrayal. He positioned his wheelchair behind the large desk, facing the door. His heart was a wild drum against his ribs. He could hear the faint murmur of voices in the hallway, Mason greeting the men who didn't exist. Then the solid click of the study door closing. Silence. He was alone. He counted the seconds, each one stretching into an eternity. He focused on the small, almost invisible lens of the hidden camera in the bookshelf, knowing Leo was watching, muscles coiled like a spring. Come on, Mason. Show me what you are. The door burst open. But it wasn't strangers from a shipping union. It was Mason alone. And he wasn't smiling his friendly smile anymore. He wore a grin of pure, triumphant contempt. He let the door swing shut behind him and leaned against it, folding his arms. Well, Kai, Mason said, his voice a low, nasty purr. Look at you. Sitting in the dark. Waiting for friends who aren't coming. Kai let his face show shock, then dawning horror. He gripped the arms of his chair. Mason? What is this? Where are they? They? Mason laughed, a short, ugly sound. There is no they, you fool. Did you really think anyone wants to make a deal with a cripple? The word on the street is that Nightfall is weak. That its leader is broken. And you know what? They're right. He pushed off the door and began to slowly walk around the edge of the desk, circling Kai like a shark. I've been running this group for months. While you've been sitting there feeling sorry for yourself, I've been making the real decisions, taking the real risks. And I'm tired of getting approval from a ghost. The betrayal, spoken aloud, was a physical blow. This was the man who had eaten at his table, who he'd trusted with his home. Kai's performance now mixed with real, searing pain. Why? He whispered. Why? Mason sneered, stopping directly in front of the desk, looking down at him. Because it's my turn. And tonight, the tragic, weakened boss has a final, fatal heart attack during a stressful meeting. So sad. He pulled a small, silenced pistol from inside his jacket. No one will question it. Leo is distracted, that pretty new guard is clueless, and I'll be the loyal right-hand man, left to pick up the pieces. This was it. The trap was sprung. Mason had shown his teeth. All Kai had to do was give the signal and Leo would crash in. Justice would be served. But before he could move, Mason's head tilted. I wasn't sure about the new kid. Why? He's a little too quiet. But you know what sold me? His references were from a place I own. He's not a plant from a rival, Kai. He's my plant. Hired to keep an eye on you to report your every move. His kindness? A very clever performance. Almost as good as yours. The world stopped. Eli's face flashed in Kai's mind. The adjusted window shade. The picked-up tablet. The chocolate. The storm song. Every gentle moment, every spark of real warmth he'd felt, shattered into a million poisonous pieces. It had all been a lie. A brilliant, devastating lie. The loneliness that crashed over him was deeper and darker than any ocean. He had been a fool twice over. Mason raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Goodbye, Kai. The hidden door behind the bookshelf flew open. Leo erupted into the room like a thunderclap, his own weapon aimed, a roar of pure fury on his lips. Mason. Mason spun, shock plastered on his face. He fired wildly at Leo, who dove for cover behind a heavy armchair. The thwip-thwip of the silenced shots was horrifically loud in the enclosed space. Kai watched, frozen in his chair, his mind numb. The trap had worked, but it felt like the most terrible failure. He had caught his traitor and lost his heart in the same instant. Mason, seeing his plan unravel, scrambled backward, firing another shot that buried itself in the desk near Kai. He was making for the main door, his escape route. He never reached it. The study door smashed inward as if hit by a battering ram. Wood splintered around the lock. And there, framed in the doorway, was Eli. His calm was gone. His warm eyes were now chips of ice, blazing with a focused, terrifying intensity. He took in the scene in a nanosecond. Leo pinned down, Mason turning his gun toward the new threat, and Kai, exposed and helpless in the line of fire. Mason sneered, swinging his pistol toward Eli. Right on time for the cleanup, kid. Eli moved. It wasn't the quiet shuffle from the hallway. It was a blur of controlled, devastating motion. He ducked under Mason's wild shot, closed the distance in 2 strides, and his hand chopped down on Mason's wrist. A sickening crack echoed in the room, and Mason screamed, the gun clattering to the floor. Eli didn't stop. A sharp strike to Mason's knee buckled his leg, and a final, precise punch to his jaw dropped him like a sack of stones, unconscious before he hit the carpet. Silence, ringing and absolute, fell over the study. Eli stood over Mason's body, his chest rising and falling once, twice. Then he turned and his icy eyes found Kai. Kai met his gaze, his own filled with a hurricane of betrayal, confusion, and a desperate, shattered hope. The words tore from his throat, raw and broken. You, Kai breathed. You were his plant? Eli looked at him, at the wheelchair, at the hidden door where Leo was now slowly rising. His intense expression softened, just a fraction, into something sad and profound. No, sir, Eli said, his voice clear and firm in the wrecked room. I was yours. For a long moment, the only sound in the ruined study was Mason's ragged, unconscious breathing. Kai stared at Eli, the words, I was yours, echoing in the hollowed-out space where his trust used to be. They made no sense. They were a puzzle he was too stunned, too hurt, to solve. Leo was the first to move. He kicked Mason's gun away and roughly rolled the traitor onto his stomach, pulling plastic ties from his pocket to secure his hands. His movements were sharp, furious, but his eyes kept flicking between Kai and Eli, confusion warring with his protective instincts. Explain, Leo growled, the word directed at Eli. Now. Eli didn't flinch. He stood his ground, but the fighting tension had left his body. He looked at Kai, really looked at him, and the sadness in his eyes was so deep and real it made Kai's chest ache. My references, Eli began, his voice steady but quiet. They were from a security firm Mason owned, yes. He thought he'd hired a spy. But I applied for the job because Mason owned it. I needed to get close to him. Kai finally found his voice, but it was weak, scraped raw by betrayal. What? Who are you? Eli took a slow breath. My sister Liana worked for Mason. She was an accountant. She wasn't part of this world. She was just good with numbers. His jaw tightened. She found discrepancies. Money going to places it shouldn't. She was going to report it to you, sir. She believed you were a fair boss. Mason found out. The pieces began to fall, each one hitting Kai with the weight of a stone. He remembered a quiet, efficient woman in accounting who had left abruptly months ago. Mason had said she'd moved away for a family emergency. What did he do? Leo asked, his voice lower. He made it look like an accident, Eli said, and for the first time, a tremor of pure hot anger ran beneath his calm words. But she managed to call me before she told me it was Mason. She told me to go to you, Kai, because you were the only one with the power to stop him. But by the time I could get here, the story was set. You were in your wheelchair, surrounded by his people. I had no proof. And you trusted him completely. Eli's gaze locked onto Kai's. The only way to get close to Mason to find proof was to let him think I was on his side. The only way to get close to you to warn you was to take the job he offered. I walked into the lion's den knowing both lions might tear me apart. The truth unfolded, brilliant and terrible. Every kind act, every moment of understanding, it hadn't been a performance for Mason. It had been real. It had been Eli, a man on a mission of justice trying to reach the Real Kai through the fortress of his lie. The chocolate, the book, the storm song, they were all attempts to build a bridge where he could one day deliver the truth. You knew, Kai whispered, the realization dawning like a cold, brutal sunrise. About my legs. Eli gave a single, slow nod. The third night. You shifted in your chair when you thought I wasn't looking. It was a natural movement, one someone who couldn't feel their legs wouldn't make. After that, I watched more closely. The way you balanced, the tiny reactions. You were playing a part just like I was. Kai felt the walls of his own deception crumble around him, leaving him exposed. He had been so focused on testing others, he hadn't realized he was being seen through by the one person he'd started to hope saw him truly. Why didn't you say anything? Kai's question was barely audible. What would I have said? Eli's reply was gentle. With Mason watching, listening? I didn't know who you could trust besides Leo. And I didn't know why you were pretending. For all I knew, you and Mason were in it together, and my sister was wrong about you. He looked at the bound man on the floor. I had to be sure. Tonight, when he sent me to patrol the lower floors and I saw his men, the ones who were supposed to be your union guests, gathering in a side office. I knew the trap was closing. Just not whose it was. Leo finished securing Mason and straightened up. He looked at Eli, his expression unreadable. You took a huge risk coming back up here. Eli met his gaze. It was the only choice. The silence that followed was different. The air, once thick with lies and violence, was now clear and sharp with staggering truth. Kai looked from Leo, his lifelong brother who had stood by him in the dark, to Eli, the stranger who had fought his way through a web of lies to bring him justice, even while grieving his own loss. He had set a trap for a traitor and he had caught something else entirely. He had caught a man of shocking loyalty and courage. A man who had seen through every one of his walls. The weight of his own pretense became unbearable. The chair was no longer a prop, it was a coffin for the man he wanted to be. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of his soul, Kai placed his hands on the arms of the wheelchair. He looked at Leo, then at Eli, his decision made. Slowly, deliberately he pushed himself up. The muscles in his legs, stiff from months of disuse but far from paralyzed, protested but held. He rose to his full height, letting the blanket pool at his feet. He stood for the first time in his own home in 3 months as himself. Not the helpless boss. Not the victim. Leo's eyes widened, but a huge, relieved breath rushed out of him. A grin, the first real one Kai had seen in ages, broke across his stern face. He'd had his suspicions, but seeing his brother stand was a different thing altogether. Eli didn't smile. He just watched, his intense eyes taking in the sight of Kai standing tall. There was no surprise in them. Only a deep, quiet acknowledgement. He had known all along. He had been waiting for Kai to be ready. Kai took a single, unsteady step away from the chair. His legs trembled but they held. He was standing in the wreckage of his plan, surrounded by the proof of his brother's loyalty and the stunning truth of a stranger's sacrifice. The game was over. The lies were finished. And in the clear, honest space left behind, 3 men stood amid the consequences, and something new, fragile and real began to take its first breath. The first thing Kai did was walk. It was only 3 shaky steps to the window, his hand gripping the back of a leather armchair for support, but it felt like crossing a desert. The city lights below were no longer a view he was trapped above, but a kingdom he could finally stand to protect. The stiffness in his muscles was a sweet, honest pain, a world away from the phantom aches of his performance. He turned to face the room. Leo was hauling Mason's unconscious body into a chair, tying him securely. Eli was silently picking up the scattered items from the desk, his movements efficient, but his eyes kept drifting to Kai, watching him stand as if making sure he was real. We need to secure him in the soundproof room downstairs, Leo said, his voice all business, but the pride in his eyes when he looked at Kai was unmistakable. Then we need to talk. Kai nodded. Eli, he said, and his voice, free from its careful, weak tone, sounded deeper, more solid. Help him. Eli paused, then gave a sharp nod. Yes, sir. He moved to help Leo, but as he passed Kai, their shoulders almost brushed. He stopped just for a second. You should sit, sir. Your muscles will cramp. It was the same caring tone, but now it was directed at Kai, the real Kai, not the character. It made something warm and fragile uncurl in Kai's chest. I've been sitting for 3 months, Kai replied, a ghost of his old, dry humor returning. I think I'll stand. A flicker of a smile touched Eli's lips before he followed Leo, dragging Mason away. An hour later, the 3 of them were back in the living room. Mason was locked away, his fate to be decided. The immediate threat was contained, but the storm he'd stirred up was just beginning. The penthouse felt different, lighter but charged with the energy of raw, uncovered truths. Kai was sitting on the actual sofa, not his wheelchair, which had been pushed into a corner like a forgotten ghost. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at the two men across from him. Leo sat rigidly in an armchair, a warrior awaiting orders. Eli stood by the fireplace, giving them space but present, his gaze clear and open. "I owe you both an apology," Kai began, the words feeling strange but right. "Leo, I'm sorry I didn't trust you with the truth. I thought the burden was mine alone to carry." Leo shook his head, a rough affection in his eyes. "You carried it like an idiot. But I understand. The plan worked. We got the snake." Kai then turned to Eli. The apology here was heavier, laced with shame. "Eli, I misjudged you in every way. I thought you were a threat or a spy. I used your kindness to test my own theories. I am truly sorry." Eli listened, his expression soft but serious. "You were playing a part to survive, sir. Just as I was. No apology is needed for that." He paused. "But my name is Eli. Not, sir. Not in here." The request was simple but profound. It was a request to step out of the roles of boss and bodyguard into something else. Kai nodded slowly. "Eli," he repeated. "Then you should call me Kai." Leo shifted, getting to the practical heart of the matter. Mason won't be the only problem. He had friends. The Red Vipers. He's been feeding them information, promising them pieces of our territory in exchange for support when he took over. A cold slice of anger cut through Kai's relief. So his betrayal goes deeper than greed. It's treason. "Yes," Leo said. "And with him gone they'll be angry. They'll see it as a broken deal. They'll attack. Probably soon." The weight of leadership settled back onto Kai's shoulders, but it felt different now. It wasn't a lonely weight. He looked at Leo, his strength. He looked at Eli, his quiet, surprising resilience. "Then we protect what's ours," Kai said, his voice firm. "But we do it differently. No more lies. No more working in the dark." He laid out the situation. The neighborhood's nightfall protected, the businesses they ran fairly, the people who relied on them not to be bullies like the Vipers. He spoke of the orphanage he and Leo grew up in, which their groups secretly funded. He talked about his dream of a legacy that wasn't just fear but respect. As he spoke, he saw Eli listening intently. This was the truth of Nightfall, the heart Kai had been protecting beneath his cold boss exterior. It wasn't the story of a ruthless mafia, but of a complicated family trying to do right in a wrong world. "I want to help," Eli said when Kai finished. His voice was quiet but steel strong. "Not just for revenge for Liana, but because what you're describing, it's worth fighting for. It's what she believed in." Leo studied Eli, his analytical gaze assessing. "You fight well. Where did you learn?" Eli's cheeks colored slightly. "I was a competitive gymnast. Then I studied Krav Maga for years. I needed an outlet after." He didn't need to say after what. It's about using an opponent's force against them. Efficiency, not brute strength. A slow grin spread across Leo's face. It was a rare sight. "Efficiency, huh? I'd like to see that in the training room sometime." It was an offer. A welcome. The conversation stretched into the deepest part of the night. They moved from strategy to stories. Leo told Eli about the scrapes he and Kai got into as kids. Kai, hesitantly, shared the pressure he'd felt taking over the group so young. Eli spoke of his sister, her laugh, her terrible singing in the car. The fortress of the penthouse became something else. A place of healing. The walls that had echoed with lies now held shared pain, shared purpose, and the first delicate threads of a new bond. As the sky began to lighten, Kai stood, his body tired but his spirit clearer than it had been in years. "We rest. Then we prepare. Together." Leo clapped him on the shoulder, a solid, brotherly thump. "Together." He headed for his room. Eli moved to take up a guard position by the door out of habit. "Eli," Kai said softly, "the threat is inside a locked room downstairs. You don't have to stand guard tonight." Eli turned, the dawn light painting his face in soft gold and blue shadows. "Old habits," he said. But he didn't move to the door. He just stood there looking at Kai. "It's good to see you standing, Kai." In that quiet, honest moment, with the night's darkness retreating, Kai felt the final piece of his lonely performance melt away. He wasn't just standing physically. He was standing with Leo by his side, and with Eli, a man who had walked through fire to bring him the truth, choosing to stay. The healing wasn't complete. The revenge was only half finished. But for the first time, Kai wasn't facing the storm alone. He had a family he could trust, and a heart that was no longer a secret he had to hide. The next week was a whirlwind of new rhythms. The penthouse was no longer a stage for a lie, but a headquarters for a coming war. The most important change, however, wasn't on the security monitors or in the new defense plans. It was in the space between the three of them. Kai's days were now filled with the painful, rewarding work of rebuilding his strength. His legs, while not injured, were weak from months of pretending. He started with simple walks across the long living room, each step a conscious effort. Leo, ever the practical soldier, became his impatient but dedicated coach. Again, he'd grunt, arms crossed as Kai finished a lap. Your pace is sloppy. An enemy won't care that your muscles are complaining. The enemy isn't in my living room, Leo, Kai would shoot back, breathing hard, but a real smile touching his lips. This was the brother he'd missed, the one who challenged him, not just protected him. It was during one of these sessions, as Kai's leg trembled after a set of squats and he stumbled, that Eli moved. He was across the room, silently reviewing security blueprints, but in a flash he was there, his hand under Kai's elbow, steadying him. His grip was firm but not forceful. Here, Eli said softly, guiding Kai to lean on him for a second. Your weight is too far forward. It's making your knee unstable. He demonstrated the correct posture, his own body a model of balanced grace. It's not about strength yet. It's about balance. Leo watched, a thoughtful frown on his face. He'd been trying to build a fortress. Eli was teaching how to build a foundation. The next afternoon, Leo finally took up his offer. All right, Mr. Efficiency, he said to Eli in the penthouse's private gym. Show me what using my force against me looks like. It started as a sparring session. Leo was a powerhouse, all raw strength and aggressive moves he'd learned on the streets. Eli was a river flowing around a rock. He didn't meet Leo's force head-on. He redirected it, used Leo's own momentum to unbalance him, his movements a blend of that gymnast's agility and sharp, precise strikes. Leo ended up on the mat more than once, not with a crash but with a controlled tap from Eli. After the third time, Leo sat up, not angry but with a look of deep respect. Okay, he panted. I see it. He got up and offered a hand to Eli. Teach me that foot sweep. Kai leaned against the doorway watching them. He saw the rigid line of Leo's shoulders soften as he listened to Eli's calm instructions. He saw the respectful focus in Eli's eyes as he engaged with Leo's power. They were speaking a new language, the language of trust, built on mutual skill, not just shared history. That trust was tested in their planning. In the war room, which was really just the dining table covered in maps, they argued. Leo wanted a direct, overwhelming strike on the Red Viper's main hangout. Cut the head off the snake, he insisted. Eli studied the maps. That's what they'll expect. Mason's failure will have made them paranoid. Their main place will be a fortress. His finger traced a line on the map to a network of smaller, street-side shops and garages on the edge of Nightfall territory. They've been pushing here slowly, testing. These places are their fingers. If we cut off the fingers, the hand is useless. It shows we're protecting our people, not just seeking a fight. It's slower, Leo argued. It's smarter, Kai said quietly, seeing the wisdom in it. It sends a message to our neighborhood that we see the small threats. That we care about the street they live on, not just the downtown skyscrapers. He looked at Eli, impressed. You think like a protector, not just a fighter. Eli held his gaze. There's no difference if you're protecting the right things. The plan became a blend of their strengths. Leo's forceful intimidation, Eli's clever disruption, and Kai's strategic mind, now sharp and clear without the fog of his deception. They were three parts of a single weapon. One night, after a long planning session, Leo was called away to deal with a minor issue downstairs. Kai and Eli were left in the quiet living room. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was full of things unsaid. Kai found himself standing by the bookshelf. He reached out and pulled the Sky Pirates of Crystallia from its place. He held it for a moment, then turned and offered it to Eli. You were right. About the captain who follows his own map. Eli took the book, his fingers brushing Kai's. A simple touch, but it sent a current of warmth up Kai's arm. He also learns he can't fly the ship alone, Eli said, his eyes soft. He needs his crew. I'm starting to understand that, Kai admitted. He nodded toward the gym. You and Leo, you're good for each other. He needs someone who can match him without trying to overpower him. He's fiercely loyal to you, Eli said. It's his core. Everything else is built around that. It's admirable. And what's your core, Eli? Kai asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Eli looked down at the book, then back at Kai. There was no hesitation. Justice, he said. And seeing the truth beneath the surface. It's what made me see you. Their eyes held. The air between them crackled with the energy of all the unsaid words, all the stolen glances, all the kindness that had been real. Kai's heart thumped hard against his ribs. He took a half-step closer. The penthouse door opened and Leo walked back in, his brow furrowed. The Vipers just hit the old flower shop on Elm Street. A warning shot. They're getting bold. The moment shattered, but the connection it revealed didn't. It settled between them, a new and precious thing. Kai's expression hardened from softness to the resolve of a leader. The healing time was over. The training was done. The Red Vipers had just declared war. He looked at Leo, a soldier ready for orders. He looked at Eli, a protector with fire in his eyes. His crew. Then we answer, Kai said, his voice like steel. We show them what happens when they threaten our home. The attack on the flower shop was a match thrown on dry tinder. The quiet tension that had filled the penthouse for days suddenly ignited into a focused, burning energy. This was no longer about defense. It was about sending a message that would echo through every dark alley and backroom in the city. Kai stood before the large map in the war room, his posture straight, the last vestiges of the paralyzed boss gone. In his place was the true leader, sharp-eyed and decisive. Leo stood to his right, a mountain of coiled strength cracking his knuckles. Eli stood to his left, his calm a deep, still pool hiding powerful currents. The Vipers think we're disorganized and weak because of Mason, Kai began, his finger tapping the map on the network of small Viper operations Eli had identified. They think hitting a little flower shop will make us panic, or rush headlong into their main stronghold. A cold smile touched his lips. So we'll do neither. He laid out the plan, a beautiful three-part dance of their combined skills. Leo, you take a team here to their biggest garage on the south side. I want noise. I want show. Smash their cars, scatter their men, make a spectacle. Let their bosses think the main attack is coming there. Leo grinned, a wolfish expression. A distraction. I can do that. Exactly, Kai said. He turned to Eli. While their eyes are on Leo's fireworks, you go here. He pointed to 3 smaller locations, a betting parlor, a smuggling drop, and a corner store used for money laundering. Silent and fast. Don't fight unless you have to. Your job is to take their money, their account books, their communication tablets. Cut the wires. Leave them blind, broke, and arguing with each other about who lost it all. Eli studied the map, his mind already working through the routes, the entry points. Efficiency, not force, he murmured, nodding in understanding. And me? Kai asked, though they all knew the answer. You, Leo said, his voice thick with protective frustration, should be here safe. Kai shook his head. No. The boss doesn't hide while his family fights. The Vipers have a commander, a man named Silas. He runs things from here. He pointed to a mid-level nightclub, not their main fortress, but their operational heart. While you two are causing chaos, he'll be there trying to hold his crumbling empire together. That's where I go. To look him in the eye and deliver the message personally. It's the most dangerous point, Eli said, his worry breaking through his calm. It's the only point that matters, Kai replied, meeting his gaze. This isn't just about breaking their toys, Eli. It's about showing them the man they thought was broken is now standing in their doorway. It ends the story Mason sold them. After a long moment, Leo let out a gruff sigh. Fine. But I'm sending my 2 best men with you. And I'm going with Kai, Eli said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Kai expected Leo to protest, to claim the protector role for himself. But Leo just looked at Eli, at his steady resolve, and gave a single, sharp nod. Good. You keep him safe. I'll keep the monsters busy. The trust in that moment was a solid, tangible thing in the room. The plan was set for midnight. As the sun set, the 3 of them prepared in the gym. Leo checked his weapons, a one-man army. Eli stretched, his movements a silent ballet of muscle and intent. Kai practiced his draws, his steps, reclaiming the physical authority that had been dormant for so long. Just before they left, Kai stopped them at the door. He looked at Leo, his brother in all but blood. He looked at Eli, the unexpected truth that had become his compass. No matter what happens tonight, he said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide, thank you. For standing with me. For seeing me. Leo clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. Always. Eli simply placed his hand over his own heart and gave a slight bow. A promise. Then they moved into the night. The operation unfolded like a dark symphony. From the penthouse security feed, Kai watched Leo's distraction. It was glorious, brutal chaos. Cars were overturned, Viper men were chased into the night, and the garage lit up the southern sky. The Viper's phones would be ringing off the hook. Simultaneously, Eli's silent strikes were a masterpiece. He moved through the 3 smaller locations like a ghost. Security feeds went dark for exactly 3 minutes at each site. When they came back, safes were empty, computers were gone, and confused, angry Vipers were left shouting at each other in the wreckage. Just as planned, confusion and blame began to spread. It was time. Kai, flanked by Leo's 2 stoic enforcers and with Eli a silent shadow at his side, walked into the Serpent's Tail nightclub. The music was pounding but the mood was tense. News of the attacks was already trickling in. Kai walked through the crowd and people parted not out of recognition but out of instinct. He carried the aura of a storm. He found Silas in a roped-off VIP area, a tall, sleek man with venom in his eyes, yelling into a phone. "What do you mean the money's gone? How does money just—" He looked up and saw Kai. The phone slowly lowered. The club's noise seemed to fade around them. "Silas," Kai said, his voice cutting through the bass. "You've been misinformed." Silas's eyes widened in genuine shock. He looked at Kai's legs, at his confident stance, and the pieces of Mason's lie shattered in his mind. You're supposed to be gone? Weak." Kai took another step forward, his men and Eli forming an unbreakable wall behind him. "Mason sold you a fairy tale. He's gone. And the territory you've been nipping at? It's under my protection. The flower shop? That was your last mistake." Silas's shock twisted into rage. He signaled to his hulking bodyguards. "You walk in here alone." "He's not alone." Eli's voice was quiet, but it carried. He didn't step in front of Kai, he stepped to his side, his stance ready. Leo's 2 men mirrored the movement on the other side. It was a united front. A fight erupted, but it was short and brutal. The Vipers in the club were disorganized and panicked. Leo's men handled the brutes with efficient force. Silas pulled a knife, lunging not at Kai but at Eli, seeing him as the weaker link. It was a fatal error. Eli moved with that same breathtaking efficiency. He caught Silas's wrist, twisted, and used the man's own momentum to slam him onto the low glass table, which shattered under his weight. Eli held him there, the knife now pointed harmlessly at the ceiling. Kai stepped up, looking down at the defeated Viper commander. "The message is this: Nightfall is not weak. Its leader is not broken. And if you or any of your snakes slither into our gardens again," he said, his voice deathly calm, "we will not cut off the fingers. We will burn the whole nest down. Do you understand?" In Eli's grip, Silas, bruised and humiliated, could only gasp a terrified, "Yes." Kai straightened up. He gave a single nod to his team. Without another word, they turned and walked out of the club, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Outside in the cool night air, the sounds of Leo's distant distraction had ceased. The mission was complete. They had protected their home. They had avenged the betrayal. And they had done it together. Kai looked at Eli, at the quiet strength in his eyes, and knew the revenge was complete. But the future, a future he suddenly wanted more than anything, was just beginning. The city, for the first time in what felt like forever, was quiet. Not the tense, watchful quiet of before, but a deep, peaceful stillness that seemed to seep in through the penthouse windows with the morning sun. The Red Vipers were in disarray, their leadership humiliated and their resources gutted. The message had been sent, loud and clear. Nightfall was strong, united, and under the command of a boss who was very much on his feet. In the days that followed, there was work to be done. Mason had to be formally dealt with, not with violence and abasement but with the cold, hard justice of their world. He was stripped of everything and exiled, a fate he considered worse than death, sent far away with a warning that would follow him forever. The neighborhoods breathed a sigh of relief, and Kai made sure to be seen, walking the streets, talking to shop owners, a living symbol of protection. But the most important work happened inside the penthouse. It was in the easy way Leo would make 3 cups of coffee in the morning without asking. It was in the way Eli would correct Kai's still awkward stance not as a bodyguard, but as someone who simply wanted him to be strong. It was in the way they would sit together in the evenings, not planning war but talking about nothing and everything: books, stupid movies, dreams for the orphanage. The bond between them had become a living thing, warm and solid in the center of the room. But within that bond, something else had grown, tender and bright. Kai found his eyes following Eli, the curve of his smile, the quiet focus of his hands as he worked. He saw the way Leo's stern expression would soften when Eli explained a clever security solution. He noticed the way Eli's calm was never shaken by Leo's gruffness, but seemed to complement it, like 2 different notes making a perfect chord. One evening, a week after their victory, they were on the large sofa. Leo was at one end, meticulously cleaning a weapon. Kai was in the middle, reviewing reports. Eli was at the other end, reshelving the books from the study, which had finally been repaired. Eli slotted the Sky Pirates of Crystallia back into its place. He didn't move away. He stood there, his back to them, his shoulders tight. "Eli?" Kai asked, putting his tablet down. Eli turned. In his hands he held not the pirate book but a small, framed photograph. It was of a young woman with Eli's kind eyes and a brilliant, laughing smile. "Liana." He walked over and placed it carefully on the mantel. A quiet memorial. A closed circle. "She would be glad it's over," Eli said, his voice thick. "And she'd like you both. She'd like what we've built here." Leo set his cleaned weapon aside. He stood and walked to the mantel. He looked at the picture, then at Eli. He didn't say a word. He just placed a large, steady hand on Eli's shoulder and squeezed, a gesture of shared loss and unshakable solidarity. Kai's heart swelled until he thought it might burst. He rose and joined them, standing on Eli's other side. He didn't have Leo's physical eloquence. The words he'd rehearsed in his mind vanished. All that was left was the simple, overwhelming truth. "I love you," Kai said, the words clear in the quiet room. He didn't look at just one of them. He looked at Leo, his first friend, his constant shield. Then he looked at Eli, his surprising truth, his gentle strength. "Both of you. Not as my bodyguards or my crew. As you. I'm in love with you." The silence that followed was not shocked, but deeply accepting. It was as if he had simply given voice to the song that had been playing in the space between them for weeks. Leo let out a slow breath, his hand still firm on Eli's shoulder. A faint, rare blush touched his scarred cheeks. "Took you long enough to figure it out," he grumbled, but his eyes were shining. He turned his head to look at Eli, a question in his gaze. Eli looked from Leo's hand on his shoulder to Kai's open, vulnerable face. The last of the sorrow in his eyes melted away, replaced by a warmth so bright it seemed to light the room. A single, happy tear traced a path down his cheek. He placed his hand over Leo's on his shoulder, linking them. Then he reached out his other hand to Kai. Kai took it, lacing their fingers together. The connection was complete, a circle of three anchored by trust, forged in fire and chosen in peace. "I love you too," Eli whispered, his voice sure and strong. "Both of you." Leo didn't say the words. He didn't need to. He leaned in and for the first time he pressed a firm, heartfelt kiss to Eli's temple. Then he turned and did the same to Kai. It was a vow as solid as any spoken promise. They stood there at the mantel, under the gaze of a smiling sister who had believed in justice, in front of the city they had chosen to protect. The paralyzed boss who had tested his world, the alpha soldier who had never wavered, and the Omega protector who had seen through every lie. They had found their revenge, their healing, and now their forever. They were no longer just Nightfall. They were Kai, Leo, and Eli. A family. And their story, the best one, was just beginning.